Okay, team, it is still a happy Monday, so here is what is government. Moving on from our last slideshow, which was really about how different governments are sorted, whether authoritarian or democratic. We're looking now beyond how they enforce their power and more into what they do with that power. So when we're looking at government today, we're looking at a democratic government, we are looking at our democratic government, and we are looking at the levels of government in Canada and what those levels are assigned to be in charge of. Now, when you think about government as a whole, and you think about Canada as a whole, I want you to think about, the difference between people's lives in Prince Edward Island versus the lives of people living in Toronto versus the lives of people living in, let's say, Vancouver or Calgary up in the Northwest Territories. As a government, especially in a vast property like Canada, the needs of the people are very, very different, and the wants of the people are very, very different depending on where you are, simply because of the demographics, because of the landscape, because of the resources, because of the way that business and tech has been built up, and because of the way that transportation has allowed those areas to develop over the past 200 or so years. Now, when we look at Canada as a whole, and Justin Trudeau, as our Prime Minister currently, leader of the Liberal Party is in charge of the entire nation. Not just one province, not just one city, but the entire nation. So decisions that they make are for the benefit of the whole community of Canada. What that means is that the federal government is one of three levels: federal, provincial, municipal. The federal level is in charge of things that affect everybody on an equal scale across the country. So things that you couldn't have decided by one province only. For example, trade and relations, currency. We're not going to have a different type of money in Ontario than people would have in Alberta or British Columbia. Our resources are exchanged, our resources are used across the country, whether it's forestry from BC or oil from Alberta being used to fund a company that might be out of Ontario. The currency that's exchanged between the two needs to be the same. The same thing is true of defense. When it comes to something like the military, because it's the protection of the entire border, it is the responsibility of the federal government. Along with the Postal Service, immigration, communications, unemployment, and employment insurance is taken care of by the federal government. You'll note in recent weeks, as they're talking about layoffs, it is the federal government who is issuing the checks for those who have been affected by business closures. The criminal code is also a federal jurisdiction, as are any dealings with the Indigenous or Aboriginal peoples. The provincial government is tier 2 on this 3-tier government system. The provincial government is responsible for making decisions that pertain to the province in specific areas of need. So again, for example, Ontario, the most populated province with a bulk of people in southern Ontario, especially in the GTA, has very different needs and very different concerns than a community might have in Saskatchewan, where things are more rural. Maybe they're concerned about snow removal, about winds, about climate, about the buildup of natural resources. In Ontario, one of our very prominent concerns is balancing education and transportation and hospitals and healthcare, etc., with the needs of Southern Ontario to Northern Ontario. Toronto asks Ontario for help with transportation, Ontario asks the government, etc., and they all lobby their cases as to why they need that specific attention in that area. It's not something that the federal government pertains to, because the needs vary from province to province, and within that province from city to city. So the province is in charge of things like property and civil rights, marriages licenses, health and welfare, education, alcohol consumption. You'll notice that we have the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, or all the LCBOs. Those are Ontario specific. In places like Quebec, they have a different body organizing their liquor control. In Alberta, it's not under the province's control. It is more free. In Ontario, that money is used to generate funds for the province. Natural resources and the environment, hospitals, driver education and licensing, motor vehicle operations, and then the highways that are outside of the city. So anything that is a provincial highway. The city itself, or your local municipal government, the one that John Tory is in charge of, deals with police and fire departments, streets and roads, water and sewage, transit, garbage and recycling, libraries, recreation, local programs, etc. So when you see construction on the City of Toronto, those things have been decided on. Whether or not construction is allowed to happen is based on decisions made at the municipal level. The transit, the way that funding is going to go into TTC is also municipal level. Now, obviously, sometimes there's a bit of an overlap. So, for example, when I just mentioned transportation, while it's a Toronto concern, if the funding is coming from the province, then the province also takes issue with the way that that funding is going to be managed. If they want to expand the subway, the city decides, where it's most useful, but the province is going to weigh in on helping it reach beyond the city. So because we have so many commuters that come into, because the province has so many commuters that go into Toronto and so many people live outside of Toronto for various reasons and then work in the city, what is actually going to help the province and reduce, environmental disturbance and, unclog some of the roadways, free up the traffic, etc. Things that the federal government and the provincial government might share responsibility in is agriculture, environmental protection, and marriage. Marriage rights are at the federal level, but issuing marriage licenses, etc., is at the provincial level. In order to fund all of the things that we get to have. So, for example, when you go to the hospital and you don't pay, when you come to school and you don't pay, when you use city parks, or when you are using city streets and there are tolls or there are costs for use, that money has to come from somewhere. A lot of jobs are funded by the government. There are a lot of government and civil servants that need to be paid, as well as all of the things that we use day to day that are paid for by the government, including things like garbage collection. All of those things need to be paid for from somewhere, and this money comes from taxes. In terms of federal revenue, your income taxes, goods and service tax, and excise taxes pay for what is distributed at the federal level. Provincial revenue comes from income tax, sales tax, sin tax, and service tax. Territories are the exception here because they don't have the population to generate enough revenue, and a lot of the territories are funded from government revenue at the federal level. At local governments, grants from the provincial government, property tax, parking fees, permits, like parking tickets, bylaw tickets, etc., fund the local government. Okay, these are some links just regarding taxing and the distribution of revenue. Now, if you want, you can click on these and take a look at them. They are not mandatory. In order to click on them, though, you will have to go back to the original slide, like the manual slide posted to Google Classroom. Okay. Other than that, those are your levels of government in Canada: federal, provincial, and municipal, and we will be taking a closer look at them this week via your assignment.